Najlepša hvala, gospod Mitja Lenasi. Gospod Mihael Proprinter iz avstrijskega podjetja IC Konsulenten Ziviltechniker je projektni vodja 27 km dolgega železniškega predora Semmering v Avstriji, ki je trenutno v gradnji. Konstrukcija vključuje predor jaške in kaverne ter je razdeljena na različna razgibana in medsebojno delujoča gradbišča. Gospoda Proprinterja vabim, da nam predstavi tehnično vsebino, prav tako organizacijo projekta in vlogo vseh, ki sodelujejo v tako velikem infrastrukturnem projektu. Verjamem, da bo predstavitev za vse vas zanimiva tudi iz razloga, ker se nam v Sloveniji v kratkem obeta več predorov, karavanškega in na trasi drugega železniškega tira Divača-Koper. Predstavitev bo potekala v angleščini. Prosim, gospod Proprinter.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Dear colleagues, I'm quite pleased to be here today. As you heard, I think you heard that I have some history with Slovenia, as I spent some time here during the construction of Tunnel Šentvid with my friends and colleagues from Melea. And I'm quite happy to be back here in Ljubljana today to give a first-hand introduction in the project Semmering Base Tunnel, project currently under construction in Austria. And it will be divided in somehow two parts. First part will be a technical part, because it would be a pity just to talk about project management and things like this of such a big and nice project. And the second part, I will give you some introduction or some information about some management tools, some organizational tools we are using for this project. First of all, the location. You will know it's part of the Baltic-Adriatic railway corridor connecting Poland with Italy, and it's crossing the mountain range Semmering, approximately located 80 kilometers south of the capital in Vienna. The length is approximately 27 kilometers, and as you can see also in the detail in the circle, the existing railway line in the brown or grayish color, it's quite a bent alignment, and what you cannot see, it's quite a steep gradient. And this is not fit for modern rail traffic. And in addition, it's a designated World Heritage Site, which is also not in favor of modernization and renovation, as you all might know. The new alignment is shown already in the red dotted line, and we can see this later on in more detail. Here we see one of the viaducts on the left-hand side when it was built in the mid-19th century, and the same viaduct still under operation nowadays. But as I said before, it's a nice scenery. You can go there, take pictures, but for modern rail traffic, it's not the best option. That's why the Austrian Federal Railways decided to go for a new solution and the Semmering Base Tunnel. So it's a total length of 27.3 kilometers. It's a twin-tube single-track system. It's connected by 56 cross passages. We have an emergency station in the center of the tunnel. We have 4 main tunnel construction lots, indicated here on this slide, and it's a mixture of TBM and NRTM approach. There are 9 kilometers of TBM excavation in the center of the tunnel, in the central construction lot, and 19 kilometers, always 2 times 19 kilometers excavation by means of NRTM. The reason for this are the geological conditions, given in this, you will see later on, quite complex conditions. Excavation started in 2014 and will go on till 2022, so we hope. Excavation is only taking place from the east, from the Portal Glocknitz, from the Portal Mürzzuschlag, which you can see on the left-hand side. No excavation is taking place. This is due to restrictions in terms of noise and pollution. This shows how the whole thing is structured. This shows the different construction lots from the entire project. And you can see it's divided in certain areas. We have the Portal Glocknitz on top, the Portal Mürzzuschlag on the bottom, and in between we have the 3 main tunnel construction lots, as well as the Tunnel Grauchenhof, equipment and tracks as areas. And these areas are further subdivided in individual construction lots. In red, highlighted in the red rectangles, it's only highlighted the construction lots which I was talking about before, the main tunnel construction lots. So the main subsurface tunnel construction lots, as well as the Portal Mürzzuschlag, where we have a cut and cover section. And you see immediately this, it's more than, or it's almost 30 different construction lots, different contracts. So a lot of people are involved in this project. So you can imagine tools have to be integrated, means and measures have to be integrated, that this works out properly. Just a few words, as I said before, about the geology. And you can see on the bottom of the slide already the entire longitudinal section, rather small, but you see rather colorful. The red circles show the intermediate access points, and it's frequently changing conditions. So we have metasediments, we have carbonate rocks, crystalline, 40 different rock types are designated by the geologists in the design. Meanwhile, we found a couple more, and there are even areas where we have more than 300 liters per second of water inflow, which we have to overcome. The detail in the rectangle shows also one of these, let's say, very prominent fault zones, which we are dealing with now. And you can see it's quite a challenging project. And I have to admit, for a tunnel engineer, it's the best you can have. You have everything. So it's very interesting. Let me tell you a little bit about the structures. So these are the single-track tunnel tubes. On the left-hand side, you see the TBM solution. On the right-hand side, the NRTM solution. We have a double shell lining system, meaning an outer lining, either the segmental lining or the shotcrete lining, then the waterproofing system, fleece and a waterproofing membrane, and then a cast in situ lining. It's a drain system, so we have sidewall drainages on either side, and a slab track or a mass spring track bed is applied. The mass spring track bed is only applied in areas with rather shallow overburden, let's say 100 meters, and residential areas above. The excavation area is in the range of 75 square meters. It's depending on the support types, but it's in this range. This is a picture of the excavation from the Portal Glocknitz from the very beginning in rather loose ground conditions you can see here. So it's excavated by backhoe. It's the upper part of the top heading showing the excavation, the start of the next round. And here you can see also typical pictures with the advancing top heading and the following bench and inward excavation to finalize the entire excavation cross-section. As I said before, we have 56 cross passages. They have the same lining system, so a double shell lining, waterproofing system in and outer lining, excavation area around 35 square meters. The cross passages have a spacing of around 500 meters, or maximum 500 meters. This is also optimized now during construction. So we were not going to the maximum for each cross passage, so we were trying to optimize now, given the geology we are encountering. And these cross passages not only foreseen that people can cross from one tube to the other, from the affected to the non-affected tube, but it are also housing electrical and maintenance facilities. You can see this on the side. So there's the emergency passage, and on the right-hand side you see there are technical rooms equipped in these cross passages. This is now one of these cross passages from the NRTM section, where already the inward concrete is cast. It's just closed to the running tube for ventilation purposes on the opposite side. And this is a typical example from the TBM section, where you can see on the left-hand side the opening of the segments to excavate the cross passage, and on the right-hand side a picture taken out of the cross passage into the TBM in the running tube excavated by TBM method. As said before, what we also have is an emergency station in the center of the tunnel. It's given by the law. If it's exceeding 20 kilometers, the tunnel, you need an emergency station. And this emergency station consists of various structures. It's caverns, it's tunnels, it's passages, it's galleries. Size-wise, it goes up to 300 square meters. You can see the 400 meter deep ventilation shaft. You see the perpendicular orientated caverns, and then you see the running tunnels, and in between the rescue cavern or the rescue tunnel. So in case of an emergency, the affected train stops in the emergency station. People leave the train, cross via the escape passages to the rescue cavern, wait there till they are picked up by a rescue train in the non-affected tube. And this is more than 300 meters long, and it's also used, as you can imagine. These are 400 meter deep shafts, and this is an intermediate access point for one of the main, or for the central construction lot. And from this construction lot, at the two of the two shafts, 2 TBM drives and 2 NRTM drives have to be equipped. So all the material supply and disposal has to take place via these 400-meter deep shafts. And that's why this area underground is already used during construction, these caverns, for placement of the site installation. So all the site installation area, which we have normally on ground or in the area of the portals, is put underground in this case. And this had also an influence on the size of the caverns, or the number of caverns and the length of the caverns. And this you can see here, this was the idea from the design, that all these site installation facilities, which you normally have outside, are brought underground. This is at the toe of the shafts, and we have the workshops, we have the concrete plant, we have the material storage, everything is put underground. And you can also see these inclined cross passages connecting the cavern area with the running tunnels, just to facilitate the track alignment during construction. And this is also showing how the arrangement of the conveyor belts is foreseen, or is taking place. You see the running tunnels left and right, you see the cavern in the center, and the ventilation gallery, which is a permanent structure, and the temporary mucking gallery, as I said, temporary, are used for these conveyor belts just to get the material out of the excavation of the running tunnels in the main cavern, into the bunker, and up through the shaft to the surface. And the final configuration from exactly this situation, you can see the temporary mucking gallery will be completely backfilled, and the ventilation tunnel will be kept open for sure for ventilation purposes. And you see also in the cavern the final configuration for ventilation purposes, but also for maintenance, electrical and emergency facilities are housed in there. This is now a picture of one of the perpendicular cavern. You see on the left-hand side the start of one of the running tunnels. You see in the center, let's say, the in between the two tubes running rescue cavern. And this is a picture taken before all the site installation equipment was brought in. Later on, the whole thing was filled with the site installation area. This is a picture showing now these inclined passages connecting the rescue area, the rescue cavern, the central cavern with the running tunnels. And you can see, just for track alignment, it's required that they have a certain inclination as to enable a proper driving for these little locomotives and trains. Also, the TBM assembly has taken place 400 meters underground. So this is in the center of the central cavern. This is done prior to the start. This is the first TBM that has been assembled. So all the material was brought down through the shafts, and the assembly took place in this cavern. And the size of this cavern, so let's say the assembly of the TBM was one of the decisive factors for the size of the cavern, because you had to turn around, you had to shift forth and back, and this gave the size. Even if you don't need this size later on, this was the decisive factor how to design the whole cavern underground. These are permanent caverns. What we also have is temporary caverns. And you can see on the left-hand side, this is the eastern intermediate access point, where we have at the end of a 1 kilometer long access tunnel some shaft head caverns, 200 meter deep shafts, and also some caverns at the level of the running tunnels, perpendicular to the running tunnels, also again to accommodate all the site installation area underground. And on the right-hand side, the more simple solution, or the simplest solution on Semmering, just 2 shafts and a couple of caverns just to accommodate a bit of site installation area. Excavation areas of these caverns are in the range of 200 to 350 square meters, so considerably big structures. These caverns will be backfilled at the end of the day. You can see on the left-hand side, it's invert concrete. The invert concrete is already in, because it's also acting as a driveway, so it's perfect for driving during construction. Then it will be backfilled with excavation material, and then pea gravel will be blown in for the upper part, just to completely fill, just to make sure it's completely filled. The right cavern just indicates the size of this cavern, so 26 by something 16 meters, so considerably big. Also this slide shows how the final configuration of the construction contract looks like. So this is one of these caverns. It will be backfilled for the majority of the cavern. Just in this case, a certain part will be kept open, and this will be kept open for the next contract. So for the contract for track installation and for equipment installation, they need to have a logistic possibility to cross from one tube to the other. Otherwise, it's too small to turn around. And this has already been considered in the design, already been considered at a very early stage. How can the later contracts, track installation and so on, how can they work under these conditions? Because 27 kilometers of tunnel and you have only access, let's say, from two sides, so it's not so easy to bring all the equipment in and out and all the material in and out. And this opening will be finally closed only once they go into operation. So the final contract, even it's, let's say, equipment installation contract, they have to close this somehow. They will find a contractor who can do this, hopefully. This is now a picture of one of the shaft head caverns. So this is at the end of the 1 kilometer long access tunnel. You can see the hoisting installation. There the shaft goes down 200 meters, and the picture is taken from the other shaft, which is connected also by a cavern here. So this is also acting as a site installation area, as material storage in between. This is this shaft head cavern. At the western access point, we can see here a picture from the beginning, from the shaft excavation. A cavern was built perpendicular to the running tubes, and you can see in the background on the left-hand side the start of the running tunnels, of one of the running tunnels already. Okay, the TBM was also defined already in the tender. So in Austria, it's common practice that the client defines some requirements for the TBM, because the contractor normally doesn't have that much time. So the client defines already the type of TBM, in this case a shield or a double shield, and some minimum parameters, torque, thrust, and so on. And what's also important, the machine has to be equipped or has to be ready for additional measures, injection, grouting, pre-drilling, things like this. And this is already foreseen, it's defined. The design itself comes with the contractor. So the final diameter was 10.14 meter, and the cutter head is equipped with 50 plus disc cutters, and you can see here the cutter head prior to, very shortly before the start of the machine. Also the segmental lining was defined, precast, sure, 3 types were defined, 3 types depending which load was taken, so normal, high load, and in the area of cross passages. So you can imagine there's some higher load. A 6+0 system, a minimum thickness was given. It's also important that the contractor does not tend, let's say, to squeeze out completely, and then we're running into troubles with cracking and so on. Planar joints, and the important thing is the segmental lining. The design for the segmental lining in Austria, in this case, comes with the contractor, because it's very closely related also to the machine, to the pistons and so on. So there is a boundary given from the client, but the design comes from the contractor. Here are some pictures stacked on the surface for 2 rings. It's always 12, prior to the transport via the shafts down to the toe. And then they're down already here waiting in the cavern, waiting to be installed in the running tunnels. And this is then the final configuration prior to the installation of all the inner lining and all the other things. Okay, so far technically, and now let's go to the management project organization. On the right-hand side you see, or you rather not see, the original organization chart. So you see lots of people, lots of teams are involved, and to simplify the whole thing, it's easier to see it like this. You have at the head the client headquarter, that's clear, and then you have the client's project team. The client's project team, we will see later in detail, is designated only to this project. And it's supported by its already existing entities, left and right, client's internal support, and at the core you see the design team. This is where we are. We are leading the design team. And the design team is in the heart of the whole organization. And it's also supported, again, by the client's construction department, and on the right-hand side, the client's track management department, and on the bottom, the client's signaling, telecom, and electrical department. So it's supported on the one hand by the construction department, but also by the operational departments. And this has to work together from the very beginning. Then there are external designers, and then there's also the site team, which comes in place once the thing goes into construction, contract management, and so on. But let's have a look into more detail, highlighted in this red rectangle, how this looks in detail. So in the project, in the client's project team, we have a project head, for sure. There's the project lead, it's one person, and he's supported by his office staff and management, cost, risk, and so on. But let's say under him, under the project lead, for each individual construction lot, which I showed you before, more than 25, there is a so-called coordinator. It's a designated person, a coordinator with all his support team, can be 2, 3, or whatever number of people. There is a single point of contact for each single construction lot. So you know, we as a designer, for example, or somebody from outside knows exactly who is the person to talk to. And I think this is one of the, it's a very important aspect, because very often it's not clear who is responsible for what. And in this case, behind all these, let's say, tasks, there are names. There are names. So in the original organization chart, it's names. There are persons named already. Who is responsible for this? And you can always have a look, okay, who is doing this? The internal support, you see on the left and the right-hand side, there are already departments existing with the Federal Railways. On the right-hand side, the regular things like procurement, IT, and law and press and marketing, but they are not permanently on the project. The project team in blue, these are people, they are permanently on the project. They're only working on this very project. And on the right-hand side, they work on a case-by-case issue, and the same goes for the left side. This is more these asset management departments and fire safety, tunnel safety input they have to give. But these are already existing departments within the client organization. Let's come to the core. Let's come to the design team. The design team, so the yellow or orange one, this is where we are. We are leading the design team. I had to put tunnel first, I'm sorry for this. It's all the different disciplines. It's a big group of designers. You can see all the things are covered there. And these are all external designers. So this is an external design team, which is also supported by additional external designers. This is the red rectangle on the lower left, which provide the basis. Geologists, geotech, hydrogeologists, and so on. They provide the basis for the designer. And we are supported on the left-hand side by the construction department. So they are only involved during construction, tunnel, bridges, road survey, but also from the operational side, the people are already involved. On the right-hand side and on the bottom. They come in only, or they deal later on with the final structure. But they have to be in place, they have to be on board already during the design phase, and later also on the construction. So all the design we are doing is checked and rechecked by the different disciplines already from the client, who later on has to operate the structure. So they cannot come later on and say, okay, no, there is not enough place for, I don't know, 25 cables. Nobody needs this number of cables ever, but you always have to design 25 cables. They cannot say later on, if they approved our design already with 5 cables, then it's done. And that's why they are on board. And for all of these disciplines, they are listed here, there are names behind. So we as a designer know exactly whom do we have to talk to, who has to approve. I mean, it's via a platform anyway, meanwhile, but we know who has to approve. Whom do we have to ask if something is not clear? And this is very important. We know a person behind if we have a question. It's always a problem if you send a question just to one of the departments, let's say the track management department, please let me know this and this, there will be no answer. But if I make a call to a certain person, I will get the information immediately. I have to get the information immediately because he is responsible for this. And this is very important. There are names behind these disciplines. Finally, let's have a look once the construction kicks in. We have the contract management on site. The contract management on the one hand are the project coordinators, I was talking before, who come from the client, and the contract management is also done from our side. So we as a design team have also our contract managers on site because they know about the contract, we develop the contract, they are the specialists. We have a site supervision on site, it's a separate contract. They are on site in case of the tunnel 24/7, so around the clock. We have a geotechnical site supervision, we will see later on his role, who also comes from our side. They are on the site also 7 days a week. We have the tunnel survey on the site and the health and safety inspectors for sure. And then the contractor for sure. They work on a day-by-day basis, daily meetings with the contractor. I just listed here project manager, site manager, unfortunately claim manager, but all these people who come with the contractor have to interact on a daily basis with this contract management and site supervision team. And there it's also very important that people can work together. We encountered some problems because there are problems on a personal level. And this is a thing which I had to learn the hard way. You have to set certain actions, otherwise it's not working out. You cannot try to solve things by, okay, let's try. These two teams, the gray and the green team, they have to provide a final product, a product of high quality, and they have to work properly together. And they have to work together and not against each other. The problem sometimes happens, if I stated here claim manager, they're not working together, they're not working in the same direction. But this is one of the main issues for a successful project outcome. I know. What's also very important, meeting procedures. We all know we are wasting a lot of time in meetings. We are sitting in meetings, there are questions asked who shouldn't be asked, there are answers given that shouldn't be given. And the client made a matrix already for meeting participants. And looking at this, just picking one geotech meeting out, there's a clear definition who is responsible for organization and protocoling and who has to participate. Other people are not allowed to participate because they're just wasting our time and wasting our air and money. And some people are participating if required only. So this is also very important, that for all the different meetings, you can imagine, big project with lots of meetings, it's very important to have procedures. The same goes for the meeting schedule. So each construction lot has a color. This is done 1 year ahead. Each lot gets a color, and it's the first Thursday per month. There is the design meeting, and the following Tuesday is the geotech meeting. And this is fixed for the entire year. And these are just the fixed meetings you have to imagine. There are a lot more meetings, exceptional meetings, and that's why it's important to have this schedule already in place. Quickly, some safety management information. The geotech engineer is in the center. He gets the information, evaluates, interprets, checks, is the behavior as expected or is it deviating, and gets the information out. This is all set in rules in the geotechnical safety management plan. And there are regular meetings. So the daily business looks like this. On-site procedure, he gets the results, he evaluates, he has a look, and if it's deviating, if it's as expected, it's fine. If it's deviating, there are certain procedures. And the procedures are shown here. This is all given, and you have to follow this. It's a warning level. There's an on-site meeting. Only, let's say, the geotech, contractor, site supervision, they decide the measures. We are informed afterwards, client is informed afterwards. Exceptional meeting taking place only if they think so. If there's an alarm level reached, immediate measures have to be set. You cannot wait if it's cracking and make a meeting before. So they have to make immediate measures, the contractor and the site supervision. then the project lead takes over the leading role, the information goes out, and you have an exceptional meeting. These meetings take place every day a week. So quite often we are out there on a Saturday or Sunday, which makes the family quite happy, but it's mandatory. These meetings are mandatory if it's an alarm level. So coming to the end, just to give an update about the current status of the works. The central construction lot, the caverns, the shafts, caverns, and so all this is finished. The TBM drives to the east are in for a length of about 3.5 kilometers. The NRTM drives to the west are in for a length of about 2.6 kilometers each tube. Western intermediate access point, shafts, caverns finished, and all 4 tubes are excavated over a length of about 1.5 kilometers. And on the eastern intermediate access points, the access tunnel, shaft head caverns, shafts are finished, and the caverns are due to be finished within the next couple of weeks, and then we start the excavation of the running tubes. Excavation from the Portal Glocknitz is in for a length of about 3.5 kilometers by today. Ladies and gentlemen, now I really rushed up a little bit. I hope I could give you some information about Semmering Base Tunnel, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to come forward later on or contact me at any later stage, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.